Alrighty, today I am going to talk about how you can think about your reader when you're in the middle of your writing process. I actually get this question a lot. How should I think about my reader? Should I think about my reader when I'm in the middle of my writing process? How might I go about doing that? So today's video, I'm going to try and tackle this topic. My name is Julia Gray. I'm an award-winning writer and educator. And on my channel, I talk all about writing and communication and connection and creativity. And so if you are looking for that, you have found the right channel. So thinking about your reader. Should you think about your reader? How much should you think about your reader? In what ways should you think about your reader when you're in the middle of your writing process? These are good questions. I'm going to mostly be talking about creative writing in this video, but in fact, in order to talk about the creative writing piece, I'm also going to talk a little bit about professional writing, just to kind of give a bit of a contrast between the two. So when I'm talking about professional writing, I'm not really talking about writing as your profession, like you're being paid to write professionally. I'm more talking about writing in professional contexts, which is really pretty much anyone who has any kind of profession. If you have a profession, if you are writing with clients, if you are writing to colleagues, if you are writing to leaders, then you are writing in professional contexts. And that's what I'm talking about. So like professional emails or memos or reports, anything kind of like that. And I'd say writing in professional contexts, really, if you had to boil it down, it would really be about being direct. You want to be as clear as you possibly can be in a professional context in how you're communicating and how you're writing. So because of that, when you're thinking of your reader, I certainly tend to think of the reader often. I think of them often, and they're very much kind of at the front of the writing process. Is what I'm saying clear? What's their experience? What do they bring to, how much knowledge do they bring to whatever this thing is, the topic? How much extra context do I need to include, etc. So they're really right there at the very front of my thinking as I'm going through the writing process. But if you're comparing this to creative writing, it's a very different kind of relationship to your reader or to your audience when you're going through a creative writing process or really any kind of creative process. The writing product, whatever it is that you're creating, is a different kind of relationship with your reader, whoever it is that you're trying to engage. It may not necessarily be so direct. You may be using different types of kind of approaches or different kind of language because you're trying to engage your reader in a way that's resonating differently than just relaying information. You might be using things like metaphor or the structure of your story or language that might be direct, but it could also potentially be a little more indirect, again, depending on what it is that you're doing. But there's a kind of playfulness with creative writing as well. Creative writing, of course, is creative. So it's often, a little more unknown. There's a bit more uncertainty and an exploration that you're doing with a creative process. And at that point, especially early in your process, I tend to try not to think about my reader when I'm in that early, playful, exploratory part of the process. I think when you're writing creatively, or really any kind of creative process, you want to be thinking about three different things. The first is the material. That could be the ideas, the feelings, the context, the particular historical moment, any social issues, cultural values, political slant, political critique, the context part, the material part. What is it that you're trying to dig into? And early on, you may not know all of it yet. You might just have an inkling. You may have a taste. You may have an image that you're wanting to start off your exploration. It could be pretty uncertain at that beginning point. But that is one piece, the material itself. The second thing that you want to be thinking about is yourself, or maybe even not necessarily thinking about it, but you want to pay attention to yourself. Pay attention to yourself and your relationship to that material, to the social issues, to the historical context, to the cultural values. to those feelings and your own response to ideas and feelings, etc. And the third thing you want to pay attention to is the form. Is this poetry? Is this a short story? Is this a novel? Is this a play? What's the form that you're working with? So those three things: the material, you, and the form. So in the early stage of your writing, when you're really exploring, you may not have a lot of certainty. And in this stage, I tend not to think about the reader. I try to not think about the reader at this stage. I think there can almost be a danger in thinking about the reader too early, because you start to imagine your conceptions, what the reader might be engaging with, or what the reader might be expecting. And your focus really needs to be on the material and your response to that material, and any additional research that you need to be doing so that you can better understand what it is that this story, this poem, this play, etc., whatever this thing is that it's about. And the concern really is in thinking too early about what the expectations are going to be, is that you're going to start to write towards those imagined expectations. And the concern really is about making the work then contrived in some way to try and meet whatever those fictitious expectations are. You couldn't possibly know what they are. And what you need to be focusing on is what the project needs. Instead of trying to give what you think the reader might want when you don't actually know. And here you're not trying to develop a product that is going to offer a solution to a problem, right? What you're doing is you're creating a piece of art. Now, this idea of entrepreneurship and creativity, this is actually really important. And there's a lot of pressure on artists to be both entrepreneur and artist. And it's an important thing. And I'd be happy to create a totally different video. And if you're interested, drop me a comment. I will happily make a totally different video about that. Now, David Bowie very famously said that when he was creating, he would not play to the gallery. He was not creating for other people. He was creating for himself and to understand his own kind of relationship with the world, his own relationship to social issues and cultural values, etc. I kind of took that to mean that he doesn't necessarily think about audience at the front of his brain when he is in the middle of his creative process. Creativity, how I interpreted what he said, was that creativity is what is resonating for him. And he's using himself, he's using his own life experience as a frame to be able to interpret. And you know, when you hear something like that, or certainly for me, when I hear something like that from someone who is really good at their craft, you want to pay attention to that. And I agree with him. That said, I am not opposed to challenging that idea just a little bit. At some point, you can start to think about your audience. When you're at the point in your writing process where you are starting to think about, now, what's the best way to craft this story? What is going to resonate with in the most effective way that I'm hoping to be able to engage whoever it is that I'm engaging, the reader? Those are questions about audience and your reader. But what's important about those questions is that it's not about giving the reader exactly what they want. It is about thinking critically about what is going to resonate, how can you craft your story so that you can go back and craft a really good story or craft a really good piece of writing. So to recap, when you are engaged in the middle of your writing process, your creative writing process, you can think about three things: the material itself, you as the creator, as the writer, and the form that you're working with. And then when you're far enough along in your process that you can start to think about your reader and your audience, you can engage in questions critically and use your thinking to continue to create a strong piece of writing. That is it for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, tell all your friends, do all the things, and I will see you in the next video.